Hello everybody, my name's Barnaby Lenon. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I taught at Eton for 12 years, taught two of the last three Prime Ministers, then I taught at Highgate School, then I was the headmaster of Trinity School, Croydon, then I was the headmaster of Harrow School for 12 years. Then I became chairman of the Independent Schools Council, so I've been basically looking after independent schools for the last 10 years. So I'm talking today about how to choose a school, okay? So I'm going to start, let me just start by reminding you of a bit of terminology that independent school for younger children tend to be called prep schools or junior schools. Independent schools for older children tend to be called senior schools very often, for children aged 11 to 18 or 13 to 18. Whereas in the state sector, they're normally called primary schools and secondary schools. Okay, that's just an important bit of terminology. Okay, now I'm going to start with a few tips of things I think that parents shouldn't do, then the things that parents should do. So let's start with the things that I don't think parents should do. These are common mistakes. So first of all, don't be over-anxious about which school you're going to send your child to. Because if you're looking at independent schools, I would say it's almost true by definition that all independent schools are pretty good. How on earth would they survive as fee-charging schools if they weren't pretty good? So parents who spend their whole lives worrying about which school to send their children to are making a mistake. And quite honestly, you know, none of these schools that are out there are going to be anything other than a good bet. Secondly, please, in this process, don't make your own child anxious, because you may well be putting your child down for several schools. Don't bang on about it too much. Don't give them, your child, the impression that it's a life and death issue, because it certainly isn't. Be cool about the whole thing. Thirdly, when deciding which school to send your child to, please don't choose a school which is a long way away from where you live. Don't subject your child to long journeys in the morning and evening. It's totally unnecessary. My oldest daughter, is about to give birth to a child, and she's already thinking about which schools she's going to send them to. And I have persuaded her that if there are no good schools near where she lives, she should move house in due course, you know, when the child is 4 or 5 or whatever age she likes, maybe when the child is 10. But don't subject your child to a long journey. Don't base your decision about senior schools simply on exam results. We're all a bit too influenced, aren't we, by exam results? Because, I'll probably repeat this point, but, you know, schools that get very good exam results generally only take in very clever children. So what you're really interested in for your child is value added. It's the progress that children make in that school from one point to the next, from the age of 11 to 16, let's say, or 16 to 18. We'll talk about that a bit in a moment. And also the other thing you've got to think about is, do you want to force your child into a school which is very selective if your child then appears near the bottom of the rank order in that school? Now, I've got two daughters. One went to one of the most selective schools in the country, in London, for girls, and she loved it there. She's very clever, very hardworking, and for her, the great thing about that school was there were many other girls just as clever as her. And so she came out with, I would say, a degree of modesty about her own ability. You know, she went to Oxford, she got a first, she's very clever, but she has been to a school with other equally clever children. That was good for her. My younger daughter is a good average ability. She went to the same school to start with, but found herself near the bottom. and as a result began to lose confidence in herself. So eventually we moved her to another school where she found herself near the top, and then she gained confidence, and that was a good decision that we made. But that school was lower down the league tables than the school she'd been in originally, but it was a very, very important decision we made, the right decision. So remember that. Don't base your decision on the current head teacher. If you turn up and your child is aged 1 or 2 or 3 and you look at the current head teacher and think they're marvellous, that head teacher will have gone by the time your child appears. So don't depend too much on that. Don't ever base your decision on former pupils nattering about their school. I mean, I ran Harrow School, and there were thousands of loyal old boys who had strong views about the school, which were all either wrong or were true 20 years ago. So don't speak to pupils who were their ages ago. Don't ask your child which school he or she prefers. Far too many parents drag their children around schools for open days, and then they turn and they say, "Now, Jonathan, which school would you prefer?" Don't ask that question, because Jonathan will give you the answer, "Well, I prefer such and such," and then when you say why, he will say, "Because I really like the biscuits." That's the kind of answer that children give. So don't ask your children. They are not in a good position to make a sound judgment. I know why you're asking them that question, because you want to feel that they're going to the school that they would choose. But no, you are the ones, that's why you're a parent. You're the ones who have the sound judgment. Don't make a firm decision about which school you're going to send your child to until relatively late in the day. You know, if you're like many parents, you're choosing 2 or 3 schools. Maybe, you know, you're looking at a school for your child at the age of 11 or 13. You're thinking, do I want a boarding school or not? Well, you have got to start the process, but usually you don't have to make the firm decision until much nearer the time. And I had plenty of boys down for me at Harrow who'd signed up for the school when the child was aged 0, but they didn't actually have to make a final firm decision until June, something like that, of the year that they were going. So children change, that's my point. Children change. And so what's true of a child aged 8 or 11 is not true of a child aged 13. And finally, my final point would be that if you go for a set of tests, let's say, and you find that there are 500 children turning up and you know there are only 100 places, don't worry, because those parents are probably, on average, put in for 5 different schools. And in the end, they're all going to get in somewhere. So don't get spooked by the fact that there may be a large number of applicants. So those are the things I wouldn't do, common mistakes. Here are a few things I would do if I was you. I would speak to parents with children at the school you're thinking of. That's the most reliable, independent source of information you're going to get. Next, start studying now, today, the admissions timeline. When do you have to register a child by? You know, there are still some schools where it's a great advantage to put them in when they're very young. There are plenty of nursery schools, for example, in London, which fill up incredibly quickly within, minutes of children being born. They've been put down. But most schools are not like that. Most schools, you have to have applied by the autumn, let's say, before the following September. But you need to know, for the schools you're interested in, the admissions timeline, and you need to know the method by which the children are selected, if they are selected for that school. You need to know precisely what they do. Let's assume that you've done that, and that you know that your child is going to have to do some admissions tests and maybe interviews. So you should prepare them for those admissions tests or interviews. Because although some schools will say, oh, you don't need to prepare, actually, most children, most parents will prepare, and it does help a bit if you prepare for, if it's a standard admissions test for a child aged 10 or 11 in English, maths, verbal reasoning, the school may provide you with samples of the sort of questions that they might set, or you can buy standardized tests from W.H. Smith's, or you can employ a tutor. There are many things you can do, but you should prepare them, and you should prepare them for interviews. And in the interview, your child should be relaxed and chatty and confident and ready and willing to talk about their hobbies. They're not going to be asked about the principles of geometry or algebra. They're going to be asked what they like doing in their spare time. So it helps to give your child practice interviews. Finally, on this very important list, if your child is at a prep school or at a junior school, and you're thinking, well, which would be the best senior school for them to go by, you must ask the head of the school, because the head will have had, usually hundreds and hundreds of children going to many different schools, will know the standards and will be able to tell you exactly what they think. So listen carefully to the head teacher of your junior school. So the basic decisions you have to take are, do I want my child to go to a day school or a boarding school? Do I want my child to go to a single-sex or a coeducational school? Do I want my child to go to a very academically selective school or not? How many schools do I want to apply for? Most people would be applying for certainly more than one. Are there non-academic things that the school does that are important to me and potentially my child? And I hope that for all of you, the answer to that is yes. I remember talking to a boy at Harrow who had just managed to get good A-level results in order to become a vet. And becoming a vet, did you know this, is the hardest of all the subjects to get into at university. And I said to him, well, what have been the best things about Harrow? And he said the best things were, I learned to play the harp, quite an unusual thing for a boy to do, but he'd learned to play a musical instrument. He'd learned to play croquet, and he'd learnt how to milk cows because we had a little farm and he worked on the farm. That was one of the things which supported his application for veterinary science. You see, he didn't mention biology, chemistry, physics, maths, all of those things, and these other things could well turn out to be just as important in his life as the academic qualifications that he got. I sent my daughters to single-sex schools, but I don't feel I could stand up here now and make a strong case for either single-sex or co-ed. I mean, the truth is that there are lots of very good single-sex schools, particularly in London, but there are also lots of marvellous co-ed schools. And I wouldn't myself put that at the top of my list, but equally, you may be someone who does, which is fine. Please do, above all, check the apply by dates. Whatever you're doing, find out when you have to apply by. Some of you will apply for schools and then your child will be rejected, but it will be told that they're on a waiting list. And that can happen, and that's fine. And remember that most schools, this is a tip for you, most schools do leave a small number of places for good late applicants. So, I made my decisions about who I was giving offers to at Harrow a year in advance, but if there was someone who applied very late, let's say it's June or July before the September, and they were clearly very good, I would encourage them to hang on. Because, even those who have accepted a place, a small number of them might drop out, and then there will be a vacancy. Think about the levels of entry, the age of entry. You can send your child to an independent school at almost any age. There are certain ages where there are more entries than at other ages, like 2, 5, 7, 11, 13, and 16. Remember 16, because quite a number of children change school at the age of 16. In the country as a whole, if you take state schools as well over 60% of pupils change their school at the age of 16. Okay, where can you get information from? You're going to get information from the admissions staff at the school that you're thinking about. So you ought to be able to ring them up and ask questions. You should be getting the destination lists. If you're thinking about a junior school, you're going to say to them, which schools do your pupils tend to go on to at the age of 11 or 13? If it's a senior school, you're going to say, give me a list of all the universities that your pupils go to every year. You're going to look up the inspection report. If it's an independent school, you're going to look up on the Independent Schools Inspectorate website, and there will be a detailed inspection report. You're going to look up on the government's performance data, and you just Google Department for Education, find and compare schools in England. And there you will get the raw results for GCSE and A-level, but also the progress scores, but with health warnings, which I'm about to give you. And you might even look at the newspaper league tables. However, the problem with the Department for Education data and newspaper league tables are, first of all, as I've already said, they generally reflect the level of selection. So, you know that if your child was lucky enough to go, say, to Westminster, Westminster is very difficult to get into. It's one of the most academically selective schools in the world, and therefore it's going to get very, very good exam results. You don't need to worry about it. But to a large degree, the exam results reflect the intelligence of the pupils when they come into the school. Secondly, you should be interested in progress data. How much progress children make between 11 and 16, 16 to 18. And you can ask for the school whether they've got that information. The Department for Education's data is pretty hopeless for independent schools in one important respect, and that is that they take no account of international GCSEs. Now, virtually all independent schools put some pupils in for some international GCSEs in some subjects. It's about 40%, in fact, of all the subjects taken are international GCSEs, because we believe they're better than regular GCSEs. But they don't get picked up by the DFE performance tables, so you can find a very, very good school, and you'll see that it says, nobody passed Maths GCSE. Nobody did pass Maths GCSE. They all got the top grades in the I GCSE, which isn't on that table. So that's a health warning. The Sunday Times league tables are quite popular, but again, they only give raw results. They tell you nothing about progress. There are some schools missing from those tables, and the league table results for prep schools are based on SATs. And SATs are the tests that are taken in all primary schools at the age of 11, and only a small number of prep schools do SATs, so they're hopeless, frankly, for prep schools. Okay, so you're also going to look at the school's website. I'm always interested in, for senior schools, the exam results subject by subject, which you should find on the website, the exam results for GCSE and A-level subject by subject. And you're going to go for open days or even just your own private tour of the school and assess the things like the behaviour of the pupils and so on. Okay, that's where you're going to get your information from. Now something about fees. So day schools have an average fee of £15,000. That's an average, so half are less than that and half are more. Boarding schools have an average fee of £35,000, something like that. Half are more than that, half are less than that. So why would you pay these quite large sums? Why would you? Well, first of all, let me tell you that independent schools do get much the best exam results. Of course, there are some state schools that get very good exam results, but the last set of league tables published were, and you can look these up yourself today, were the 2019 A-level and GCSE results. If I look at the 2019 A-level league table based on A-level points, 9 of the top 10 were independent schools, 40 of the top 50, 78 of the top 100, 151 of the top 200 are independent schools. I counted them yesterday. But all good independent schools go way beyond exam results, because we know that exam results only have a modest correlation with success in life, okay? The other day, I met a young man I taught ages ago at Eton. He wasn't particularly academic, but he then, a couple of years after he left the school, went out and he set up the Charles Tyrwhitt mail order shirts company. He was one of the first people to advertise mail order shirts, normally in Sunday newspaper colour magazines. It was before the internet, and he made a tremendous amount of money, I'm sure, and a great success of his life. I've taught a lot of boys whose life has been based around sporting achievement, people like Matthew Pinsent and Binny Villipola was a pupil of mine, or who have been outstandingly good at music or drama, people like Benedict Cumberbatch. These were all young men, but it's exactly the same with young women who benefited from the non-academic curriculum. Got the point? So, all good schools and all independent schools are there partly to develop skills and lifelong interests. I met a guy the other day, he was about 60, and I said to him, "What was the best thing you did at Harrow?" And he said, "Oh, learning to sail." I mean, Harrow is frankly a long way from the sea, but anyway, that's what he said. Sailing has been a great interest of mine throughout my life. There are just hundreds of examples of pupils like that. Remember that independent schools, unlike state schools, are directly accountable to parents. State schools are directly accountable to, the Department for Education or the local authority, one or the other. But no independent school is going to survive if the parents aren't happy. Secondly, independent schools have smaller class sizes, which means that they're able to adapt more easily to the needs of individual children. Independent schools very often have specialisms, like, this school is for those with special educational needs, this one for very able pupils, this one for pupils who are very good at music or dance or drama. This is a boarding school for parents who particularly want that. This is a single-sex school. Do you see what I mean? There are much more of these specialist independent schools than can be found in the state sector. And also, independent schools tend to keep things that are fading in the state sector alive, like modern languages and classics and music and science, particularly for girls, are very strong in independent schools. Also remember that most independent schools, not all, but many, are quite old. Nearly all state schools, I say nearly all, a high proportion, well over half of state schools are only about 6 or 7 years old, because they changed into academies under David Cameron. So 5 or 6 years ago, if you look on the DFE performance tables, you'll see this. 5 or 6 years ago, they all changed their name, they changed to academies, and so that's probably a good thing, but they're still an experiment in progress, whereas many independent schools are quite old, and that has the advantage of strong personality. They have a strong, vibrant personality. You'll remember that back in April, May 2020, last year, the newspapers were, in a way, quite critical of independent schools because they were doing so well online. Independent schools had gone online very quickly and were replicating the entire timetable to their pupils, whereas state schools were still being instructed by the unions not to do live broadcasts. And that's why this last summer, everyone was shocked by how well the independent schools did. At A-level, over 70% of grades were AA star. That didn't come as a surprise to me. It was a direct result of our response to the pandemic. Okay, next I want to talk about scholarships and bursaries. So scholarships are, let me call them bribes. They're a way of encouraging very able pupils to come to a school. They're just a fee reduction. And many schools give scholarships for those who seem to be particularly strong academically or are very good at music, and sometimes also very good at things like art or sport or drama. And the details of the scholarships will always be pretty clear on the website. Bursaries are a different thing. Bursaries means a fee reduction based on your income. So they're means tested. That means that you will have to submit a tax return, and the amount that you can pay will be assessed every year that your child is at the school, normally. So why do schools offer these bursaries? It's partly because they're interested in attracting talented pupils who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford to come, but also because independent schools value diversity. They don't just want the children of wealthy parents, they're keen to have a diverse range. And that's certainly what I found. I mean, my first headship was Trinity School, Croydon. And Trinity School in Croydon, like the other Whitgift Foundation schools, turned out to be very rich because it owns half of central Croydon. And so I was able to give possibly, I think, half of all my pupils a means-tested bursary, and many of them paid no fees at all. But it was a competitive entry, many of them coming from primary schools, doing a tough English and maths test. But there it goes. And there are plenty of other schools that give large numbers of bursaries. The school which gives the largest number is Christ's Hospital in Horsham. But there are, if you live in the north of England, schools like Manchester Grammar, all schools give bursaries. The problem is that not all schools make the information about bursaries very clear on their websites. Some schools, I think if you looked up the Whitgift Foundation, you would see, here's our scale. This is what we do. If you came from Birmingham, King Edward's Birmingham, or King Edward's High School, it's very clear on the website. Other schools, it's less clear, so you've got to ask. You've got to ask the admissions office. And bursaries, of course, the assignment of bursaries is quite complicated, because it's going to be a combination of how much does the school want your child and how much can you afford. So when I gave bursaries at Harrow for boys who were very good at music, for example, what would happen is the bursar would say to me, "Headmaster, this year you can spend, let's say, 300%. That means the equivalent of 3 full school fees worth on musicians." Now, and then I would always have a decision. Do I want to take this musician, who's very good, let's say he's already on grade 6 or 7 at the age of 13, but has got no money at all, so that would be 100%, or would I rather take these 3 musicians who, one plays the trombone, one plays the piano, one is very good at singing, each of those needed 33%. And that could be a choice I had to make as a headmaster. All I'm doing is hinting at the complexity of the decisions that are going to be taken in relation to bursaries. Now, finally, just a word about boarding schools. So, first of all, boarding is much more common in the 6th form than anywhere else. A third of all the boarders in the country are in the 6th form. It's not common now for children under the age of 13, although there are some. I sent my younger daughter to a boarding school when she was 16, and it turned out to be a great thing for her, because she made friends who she still sees virtually every week. That's one of the great things about boarding schools, is most boarders tend to make lifelong friends. But however, is your child suitable? Believe me, as someone who's run boarding schools not all children are suitable. Okay, they've got to be able to withstand the shock of being away from home. Some children thrive when they're away from home and their relationship with their parents improves as a result of being in a boarding school. Others less so, if you suffer from homesick. Are you, the parent, suitable? There are too many parents who, 3 weeks after their child has started at boarding school, miss them so much they decide it was a mistake. So you, the parent, have also got to have a degree of resilience and commitment to the process. Boarding is very expensive, but the children in a boarding school are generally looked after incredibly well. The marvellous thing about boarding schools is that you can have a very flexible timetable. I mean, when I was the headmaster of Harrow, I would look out of my kitchen window at 9 o'clock in the evening and I would see all the lights coming on in the new modern languages block, because the lessons in Mandarin, Japanese, Serbo-Croat, Russian were about to begin at 9 o'clock in the evening after prep for an hour. That's a great thing. You know, you don't have to have lessons between 9 and 4. You can have lessons in the morning, sport in the afternoon, lessons in the early evening. You know, the point is it's flexible. Obviously, the other advantage of boarding schools is that the volume of extracurricular, co-curricular activity is incomparably great. You know, at a boarding school, you most certainly can be doing sport 7 days a week. If you're a musician, you might certainly have 2 performance opportunities every week. It's just incomparably greater. But the other thing is, if you're thinking about boarding schools, you must work out, first of all, is this school mainly a weekly boarding school, which means it runs from Monday morning till Saturday afternoon, and then many of the children go home, or is it a 7 days a week boarding school? There is a big difference between those two types of boarding school, and I know that most parents prefer one type or the other, and I wouldn't particularly recommend one type or the other. That's up to you. But what you don't want to do is think that you're putting your child into a full boarding school and then on a Sunday it's a desert. Everyone's gone home except for your child. And then the final point from me on this, and that is the getting on well with the house parent. The house master or house mistress matters a lot. So if you are sending your child to a boarding school, just try and find out how your child is going to be assigned to a boarding school. It's probably actually fine for the school to assign them, but you should take a bit of an interest in the boarding house and the teacher who's going to be in charge of your child, because they are the substitute parent during the term. They're very important. And, you know, you could choose the best boarding school in the world. If you haven't got a decent house parent, then you're wasting your money. So always take a bit of an interest in that.